Okay, what we're going to do is we're going to look at the secret to prediction, and I say secret because nobody really knows this. I've only taught it to 2 classes, and as I've said many times, if the astrological community knew what I had here, they'd knock my door down to learn it, but it's something that, you know, maybe we will publish, you and I, Barbara. But it's a technique that absolutely works, and it's scary accurate. And I say scary because it's so predictive that you can't avoid what it shows. When I say accurate, I'm talking about astrological predictions that are based on scriptures. And the first scripture that I will share with you is this one here. Let no man therefore judge you in meat or drink or in respect to the holidays or the new moons or the Sabbath days, which are a shadow of things to come. The new moons are the shadow of things to come. They're literally the shadow of the earth going over the moon. So this is what we're dealing with when we deal with new moons. We're dealing with the new moons that happen every month, and they foreshadow things to come. And the second, I'm going to share with this way. The key to astrological prediction revealed the quest for answers. For many years of practice as a practicing astrologer, I've been using techniques which had a very high degree of accuracy and worked to reveal the accuracy and power of the astrological technique in predicting events. But even with this came exceptions and deviations from the expected results. I used to do on-the-air readings and prediction as well as private consultation for years. And I was very accurate, but not 100%. And I never could figure out why there was an anomaly of some degree there. But I knew I had techniques that were working, but there was always something missing, and I never knew what it was until later. Scripture says, with years of with years of doing astrological work as a radio astrologer, author, and teacher, I found that the anomaly of aberrations of my predictive work to be within the acceptable range of acceptance and permission. But it also left me with a quandary of why sometimes the predictive technique seemed infallible and other times it was inaccurate. I couldn't quite understand why. So Scripture says love frees us from the curse of the law. The law is karma, which means that whatever you sow, you're going to reap. So love never faileth, but whether there be prophecies, they shall fail. For we know in part and we prophesy in part. That's Scriptures. Okay. My 10 years in a monastery, okay? What is the monastery? I'll tell you. It's basically a term derived from the Greek. It basically denotes the building or a complex of buildings that houses a room reserved for prayer, as well as the domestic quarters and workplaces of monastics, whether monks or nuns, and whether living in a community or alone, like a hermit. For nearly 50 years ago, in 1962, I had the dubious distinction of being one of the most wanted men in the United States. I was wanted in 5 states for armed robberies. I served 10 years in prison, and these years were dedicated to the study of astrology and metaphysics. And I tell that story because that's where people say, where did you learn this? And I had a captive clientele. Nobody went anywhere. So I was able to do work and research based on the activities of those individuals that I was making predictions for. And obviously, if you're in prison, you see a Mercury-Mars affliction, you don't have to worry about a car accident, which you might predict out here. But in there, their mouths would get them in trouble, and there'd be a fight. Mercury, communication, right? And Mars, violence.
Right.
So, you know, obviously the environment you're in has some dictation over what's going to happen to somebody. But I found out how accurate it was in those years of prison. Okay? So it was an experimental lab for me. Okay? These years gave me somewhat of a monastic existence, and for years I was able to observe the accuracy of astrological forecasting in an environment that allowed me to view the outcome of my predictions and the fulfillment of them or their failure. It was a laboratory of sorts that gave me a view into the way astrological influences worked in the human psyche. Upon my release from prison in 1972, I began to teach and lecture on my years of revelation and research. Upon my release, I wrote a book entitled The Greatest Story Never Told, which has been reviewed and praised by scholars. The book was a culmination of my research into astrology, mythology, psychology, and Christian scriptures. What worked for me, as any astrologer will attest to, they generally have worked up techniques that they have been handed down by those ancient or modern teachers of the science. Some have devised their own methodology and swear by it, and others keep searching for the holy grail of astrological prediction. Okay? I call it the three wise men. I found after spending years of work in this field that the techniques that worked for me were essentially the three simple calculations, which went against almost all modern astrological teachings. Okay? Having worked in radio for over 30 years doing on-air astrological readings, I found time of the essence in assessing a birth information and seeing forward and backwards in time in my clients' charts. For me, it's not, by the way, just about seeing the future. I believe a good astrologer should be able to look at the past. And if you can predict things in the future, why can't you predict things that have happened in the past? If you're a good astrologer, you should have that ability, okay? The technique I'm going to teach you will show you how you can do that, okay? Okay, the most important and mostly overlooked influence in the chart is the new moon's predictive influence. The scriptures tell us to let no man judge in neither meat nor drink or the Sabbaths or new moons, which are a shadow of things to come. The new moon is literally shadow of the earth, cast over the moon by the earth and the sun. That's in Colossians 2:16. That's scripture, okay? Okay, in years of observing the new moon's influence, I found them to be predictive of more than just personal astrological influences. The new moons, whether an eclipse or not, is a powerful predictor of events in one's life. In creation story, in Genesis 1:14, and God said, "Let there be lights in the firmament of the heavens to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons, for days and for years." One of the reviewers of my book is one of the top Hebrew scholars in the world, who wrote a wonderful review for my book. That's Dr. Isaac Fried. He's one of the... anyway, he said, one of the things he said in his review was he never really realized that the book said, the scripture said signs. And it was quite a revelation for him in Genesis when it talks about creation. Okay, so what the Christians ignore, this is scriptural. There shall be signs in the sun, the moon, and the stars. Okay, the sun shall be darkened, and the moon shall not give her light, and the stars shall all fall from heaven, and the powers of the heavens shall be shaken. What's all that about? Okay, the sun shall be darkened, and the moon shall not give her light. These are eclipses. Okay, okay. The heavens declare the glory of God. In the Psalms it says, and the firmament showeth his handiwork. Day under day uttereth speech. Day under day uttereth speech? What are they talking about? And night under night showeth knowledge. There is no speech nor language where their voice is not heard. Their line goeth out throughout all the earth, and their words to the end of the world. In them hath he made a tabernacle for the sun. Moreover, by them is thy servant warned, and in keeping of them there is great reward. Now, I want to review that in an astrological context. As you read that scripture, it says the scriptures, it says the heavens declare the glory of God. The actual original translation was the planets. The planets declare the glory of God, and the heavens showeth his handiwork was the original meaning of that verse. And day under day uttereth speech. What utters speech? The planets. And night under night showeth knowledge. What? The planets. There's no speech nor language where their voice is not heard. Do you know that astrology is one of the only universal languages? It's spoken the same, written the same in almost every language. The astrological symbols are known worldwide. Okay, so there's speech nor language where there's no speech nor language where their voice is not heard. Their line goeth out all the earth. What do you think that means? Their aspects, their angles. The word planetary angles might be planetary angels. The word angel may come from that actual meaning.
From angles.
Yes. Okay. Which is an influence, okay? So it says, the line goeth out throughout all the earth, and their words to the end of the world. In them hath he set a tabernacle for the sun. If you doubt he's talking about the planets, what does it say there? In them hath he set a tabernacle for the sun. Okay? which the planets revolve around. Okay? Okay. Moreover, by them is thy servant warned. Huh. How can you be warned unless they have an influence? Tell me that. And in them, and keeping them is their great reward. What does that mean? Keeping their positions, knowing where they're at. Any astrologer knows we have ephemeris that can tell us where the planets are every day. This is not new knowledge. The Greeks understood it. The Romans understood it. It's well been throughout history. As far back as we have record, there's been astrological records kept. Okay? So in keeping them is their great reward. Okay? Eclipses of the sun and moon have been recorded throughout history, regarded as being a shadow of things to come. Historians like to attribute these early observers of these stellar events as being superstitious pagans who believed the dragon was consuming the darkened luminaries when they observed the eclipses. Do you know that wars have actually been stopped when an eclipse occurs? Because the invading army decides they can't win with that influence? Did you know that? Medes and Persians, there was an actual war stopped because of an eclipse.
Really?
Yes. But the skeptics and astronomers who cast their aspersions on these historical events pay no attention to the fact that the Chaldeans in the 6th century has already calculated the period of eclipses, which they called seros, to the degree of accuracy that is astonishingly close to perfect. They understood perfectly the cause of eclipses and foretold them with accuracy. Charges of superstition and ignorance is unwarranted. Essentially, the new moon as a shadow of things to come needs to be augmented by two other factors to produce a prophecy. And this is where I'm going to take you on a journey. Okay? There's a scripture that I used to ascertain the likelihood of an event happening, and it says, except there be 2 or 3 witnesses to establish something that is not established in law. In astrology, you're dealing with the laws of astrology. You're dealing with laws. The laws of this solar system. And, okay, so the scripture says it's written in the heavens so that them that run may read. That's scripture. It's written in the heavens so that them that run may read. Okay, so if the root of the tree doesn't forecast it, then the event cannot be foretold. In other words, the chart has no root meaning that is not to be deviated from by the new moon influences of the transits or the progressions. If the natal chart does not promise something, then the secondary influences cannot produce it. This is the most important thing I can teach you, Barbara, of all things. Do not make predictions based upon an aspect in a chart, be it a square or opposition from a progressed aspect, or from a new moon, or from transit Saturn, if the natal chart doesn't promise it. You see what I'm getting at? So if a chart does not have an affliction to a particular point, and yet you say, oh my God, Saturn's coming over. I hear people in astrology doing that all the time. Oh my God, Saturn's going over my center. Oh my God, Saturn's doing this. You know, and it's not doing anything really, because it's not touching any point in that chart that significantly has a promise of any bad foreboding. You see what I'm saying? So it's very important you keep that in mind. The root of the tree, you're not going to, you know.
So it has to be afflicted in the chart
for it to produce that
for it
event.
to produce.
Okay? So the transit themselves will not produce something. The chart is your karmic pattern of unfoldment. And if it's not a karmic message there that says you've got a lesson to learn, girl, then don't start getting worried about it because Saturn transits. Okay? This is something I see a lot of astrologers don't do right.
Very interesting. Thank you for that.
So the second influence is the progressed moon. This influence is roughly 28 years in its cycle around the chart. The progressed moon position is critical to seeing the major influences occurring in the chart. I do not use any other progressed planet. This goes against most traditional teachings. You want to get confused, try to put all those other planets in that chart, start trying to make predictions by them. You'll be so inundated with confusion that you'll not be an astrologer of any accuracy, I guarantee you. Stay with this simple technique I'm teaching you. You're going to see how accurate it is. And your method, if your methods work for you, then use it. I tell people that too. With my students, I say, look, if you do something, you find something works, do it. I'm going to give you what I know works. I'm not going to tell you not to do anything. I'll tell you what I recommend you don't do, okay? Like I just did. I don't recommend you ever make a prediction based upon something that's not foreboded and predicted in that chart already by the root Okay?
It has to be aspected in that actual
Yeah,
chart.
exactly. So you come to me as a student, you come to me to be tutored, I'm gonna tell you how it is, you go and do your own thing, okay? I mean, that's gonna, I see students, I can bring them up the best I can do, and they're on their own. They're gonna have to do what they do. And your method works for you, then use it. I realize that many astrologers will find this heretical, and I have always told my students that they should work with what they find effective. Again, as the good book says, try all things, prove all things, and hold fast to that which is good. If it works for you, use it, is all I can tell you. Okay, there's another saying I like, graze in everyone else's pasture, but give your own milk. you know, you can learn everywhere. You can go and read books, and you can do, but start working with your own stuff, and start working with what you find works. Okay, the good book says the meek shall inherit the earth. The original meaning of the word translated meek was actually teachable. Did you know that?
No.
Yeah, meek to me is kind of like, oh, you're meek, you're mealy, kind of mealy
Yeah.
mouthed. You're afraid to speak. You're reticent. You're shy. Meek, right? That's not what I meant. The meek meant teachable. And the worst condition a person can be in is unteachable. They assume they know it all and are not open to being taught another method or way. To me, if I have a student like that, I'd rather not have them. Okay? I used to hire and fire and work with salespeople for years. I was vice president of a major company and marketing and sales. And if I had somebody who knew it all, it was a waste of time. They're going to do it their own way, and they're going to fail. So that's just the way it is. Despise not prophesying, the scripture says. A lot of people do. Christians do. They despise it. They don't want to see anybody doing any of this kind of work. It says, prove all things and hold fast that which is good. I'm sharing a technique that has proven itself as the most prophetic tool I've ever seen, and one that has been tested over and over again. I will be showing you example after example of the accuracy of this technique, so you can see for yourself how effective it is, okay? I'm not talking about theory, I'm talking about practice. I'm going to show you it works. And it's undeniable. So the 2 rules I taught you already are what? New moons, right?
Yes.
And progressions. That's the 2 things I talked about.
Yes.
Okay? The 3rd rule is this one. The 3rd rule is a factor, the one that I discovered quite by accident while teaching a class in 2007. It made so much sense after I happened on it, and it fits the whole role of the planet perfectly. This influences transit Saturn. I've watched astrologers for years watching with trepidation and fear the transit of Saturn through their charts, worrying that it was going to cause some major calamity in their lives. Only 2, in most cases, pass without any measurable effect. What the cosmic key, which is what I call this technique that I teach, reveals is that Saturn is the key to unlocking the actions of the chart. If you study astrology and you look up some of the meanings of Saturn, Saturn rules keys and locks. Did you know that?
Yes. Yes,
You know?
it did.
So I had a friend of mine who owns or manages a restaurant down in Superior. Did I share this story with you? And so he had a really heavily afflicted chart, okay, and I was worried about death to him or to people around him. And when that progression came up, I did his chart, and I was really concerned. Well, within 2 weeks, 3 people died in his life. His two very close friends and a manager of the other restaurant that he was working at, one of the restaurants in the chain. 40-year-old fell dead of a brain hemorrhage. And then the other man was a chef and a cook that he knew for years, good friend of his, who was a gay man, who his lover had committed suicide a year ago. Well, he, in turn, before he committed suicide, he bought this young man his own home in his own hometown, so he would always have a place to live and be secure. And of course, he was working as a chef here in Florida, and he committed suicide too, just a couple of weeks. This is just a few weeks ago. Committed suicide himself. Always grieved about his lover that had gone before him. The point is that was the 3rd death. The other one was right next door. It was a restaurant next door. The manager fell dead in that restaurant too. So all these influences were around him, but I was also worried about him.
So is this coming off a Saturn transit or all
Yeah,
three of them?
all of it in his chart,
All
yeah,
of them.
yeah. And I could do that chart for you, I have it here, but right now I just want to bring that up real quick because the thing was that he had an incident where I kept telling him, because he had Mars-Saturn energies afflicting very bad, and emotional outburst, and he's a very calm guy, Greek, he's very, very wise, you know, beautiful man. And he told me one day, he said, I fell asleep on the way home, I almost crashed my car. That was during this influence, okay? And I told him it was going to end on the next new moon, which is this last month. And sure enough, he almost kills himself in his car. Then he gets so angry, he said, I've never been so angry in my life. I started shouting, and he never does that. And when he was at this other restaurant with this other owner of the restaurant, and he just literally went off with anger that he said, I've never experienced so much. And all of a sudden, I had a sharp pain go in my chest. And he said, my God, Ron, he said, I remember what you told me. And so there was danger, so I cautioned him over the last week. I go there every week, usually 2 or 3 times a week, and sit with him and make sure he's keeping everything together here. Because I want him to get through these heavy things, because the progress moon and the transit Saturn were already there. And then this last month, the lunation, the new moon, was triggering the third energy. Very dangerous. So death all around him, and almost dies himself. And I'm still watching over him like he's a close friend of mine. I go there all the time, make sure he's keeping everything under control. The reason I started that conversation is something else. He had to fire his manager, and I know her well. She's a sweet little gal. She's a single mother. Why did it happen? All over a key. Saturn affliction. She had given the keys to a girl that was working in the restaurant that had stolen from the restaurant.
Okay.
And he was furious. And she lied to him and told him she didn't give it to him, and that she opened the restaurant. And well, he got there early enough, and he happened to see that she was the one that had the key. And this girl had lied, the manager had lied to him.
So she had to go.
So a key, can you believe that?
It's all about a key.
Yeah, so Saturn, when you're looking at Saturn, it has a lot to do with keys. Getting locked out of things, not being able to open something, you know, that's the, okay. So that was a little digression from this thing. Okay, so I've watched astrologers who were watching the trepidation of fear, the transit of Saturn through their charts, worrying it's going to cause some major calamity in their lives, only to, in most cases, pass without any measurable effect. What the cosmic key reveals is that Saturn is the key to unlocking the actions of the chart. But those actions must be supported by one or two of the other indicators before it can be triggered. It's this combination that unlocks the prophetic power of the birth chart. It's sort of like this. I have a safe. It takes 3 numbers to unlock that safe. You go backwards, forward. You've opened a safe before, right?
Right, yes.
And if you get the 3 likes, what happens?
It
Those
opens
pins
up.
drop and it happens, right? And it unlocks it. This is the key to unlocking the prophetic power of a chart. It's the same as a key on a safe, a lock on a safe. So these indicators must be triggered. It's a combination that unlocks the prophetic power of the birth chart to reveal imminent peril or positive actions. None of this is interpretable without a sound astrological background to begin with. Some people will have a difficult time with what I'm going to show you, but I'm going to show it to you. Okay, I'll begin the lesson with major impacting events of near death, and destruction to prove the amazing power of the cosmic key. Systems to foretell major crises in a chart. As these charts show the very destructive power of the combinations of these aspects in charts with major afflictions, I've chosen them as they demonstrate the incontrovertible power of the cosmic key to predict events of major impact on our lives. Having worked with this planetary influence for decades, I've always been aware of the relationship of Saturn to keys, to timepieces, chronometers, chronos, father time, the measure off of all things, etc. Transit Saturn is only able to unlock the meaning of the chart and bring out the hard aspects of it when it is triggered by 1 or 2 other influences. 2 or 3 witnesses. In other words, when progress moon aligns with major factors in your chart, and the lunations, which are the new moons of course, align to impact your chart, then like a alignment in a slot machine, When all three line up, or even just two at once, then the action happens. I will demonstrate this clearly as we continue this lesson. Slot machine's kind of an interesting parallel. Because, you know, you get two, you might win something, right?
Right.
You get three, you're going to win the
Three.
jackpot, right?
Right.
Well, you get the jackpot when you get three of this.